In the quiet hours of night, when the streets outside have emptied and the world has drawn its curtains, there exists a silence so deep it feels almost ancient. It is in this hush that certain stories awaken, not loud tales of battle and conquest, but softer ones, the kind carried by whispers, folded into the pages of forgotten books, or tucked into the margins of old letters. This story begins with such a whisper, faint and patient, about an object whose presence has brushed against the edges of history for centuries. No one alive today was there when it was made. No living soul has seen it in the moment of its creation, nor heard the sound of the tools that shaped it. And yet its absence has been felt, as though the air of time itself has remembered. The first hints of its existence arrive not as a proclamation, but as a suggestion, a single line in a brittle manuscript, a passing reference in a merchant's diary, a half-remembered folk song, sung in a remote village where few have reason to visit. To speak of the artifact is to step into a dimly lit room where the dust hangs in still beams of sunlight, and every movement must be slow. The shelves here sag under the weight of centuries, and their contents, scrolls, ledgers, odd little boxes, whose locks have long rusted shut, seem to hold their breath. Somewhere among them lies the thread that begins the tapestry of the artifact's life. It is a thin thread, fragile to the touch, yet it pulls with surprising strength, drawing the curious deeper. Those who first tried to find it were not adventurers in the romantic sense. They were archivists, monks, and tired clerks working by candlelight. They were the kind of people who knew how to listen, not to the words shouted from podiums or written in bold ink, but to the quiet repetitions of rumor that survive precisely because they have no urgency. An elderly librarian, years before his death, once told of a chest in a monastery cellar that no one had opened in generations. A traveling scholar, sipping wine in a tavern, far from home, recalled an emblem in a manuscript he could never quite place. These details, scattered and incomplete, would mean little on their own. Together they begin to form a shadow. That shadow is what lingers at the start of this journey, more absence than presence, more question than answer. What could be so significant that it would be hidden away for lifetimes? Was it locked away to protect it from those who might harm it, or to protect the world from whatever it contained? The mind, when given such a puzzle, cannot help but turn it over and over, examining every angle. And so the artifact's legend grew, not from what was known, but from the vast spaces between what could be confirmed. Imagine for a moment, the first person who realized the artifact's story had slipped almost entirely from history. Perhaps it was in the middle of a storm, when the rain rattled against the shutters and the ink on the page began to blur, or perhaps in the height of summer, when the air in the archives turned thick and the sound of paper crumbling under fingertips was the only movement in the room. The discovery may have been nothing more than a pause, a furrowed brow, a slow turning back of pages, and a recognition that something important was missing. That absence became the beginning of a quest, though not one carried out in the clamor of streets or under the bright glare of the sun. No, this quest belonged to those who could walk between worlds, the world of tangible facts and the one of drifting stories that resist being pinned down. Each clue was less like finding a key, and more like hearing an echo, a vague sketch of an object in the corner of a centuries-old map, an annotation in a language barely understood, its letters curling like vines across the parchment. The listener, you are invited to hold these scraps carefully, for they are all we have at this moment. The artifact itself remains unseen for now, its form and purpose still shrouded, but its weight in the imagination is already immense. Objects, after all, are never just themselves. A cup may hold water, but it can also hold memory. A crown may rest on a brow, but it can also carry centuries of ambition, betrayal, and hope. So it is with the artifact. Whatever it is, jewel, relic, tool, or token, it carries a story as intricate as the hands that once shaped it. Even the way we first hear of it shapes how we feel about it. Because the artifact is not announced with fanfare, we approach it with caution, curiosity, and a kind of reverence. It asks us to move slowly, to accept that some doors open not with force, but with time. The quiet voice that first spoke of it seems to echo in the spaces between our thoughts, as if the artifact itself is choosing when and how it will be found. In this opening moment, nothing is fully revealed, and that is precisely the point. The story begins not with a triumphant unveiling, but with the faint sound of something stirring far away, a reminder that history is not a straight line, but a web, and some strands are buried deep. As the room of our imagination darkens and the voices of the day recede, we lean forward into the shadows, following the thread wherever it might lead, and so the stage is set. We know only that there is something to be found, something that has passed quietly from hand to hand, era to era, avoiding the blunt gaze of history, while leaving just enough trace to be remembered. The air feels heavier now, not with danger, but with the gravity of time. We take our first step, knowing that the artifact's journey, and ours, has only just begun. The thread we follow pulls us back, far beyond the dust-filled rooms of forgotten archives, to a time when the world felt larger, when maps were unfinished, and the horizon carried both fear and promise. The artifact's story begins not in isolation, but in the beating heart of a civilization alive with invention, artistry, and ambition. It was an age when hands shaped more than just objects, they shaped meaning. Across the city where the artifact was born, the air was thick with the scents of fresh-cut cedar, warm clay from the kilns, and the faint bite of metals being drawn from the forge. Narrow streets wound between high walls, their plaster painted in bright mineral colors that caught the sun. The marketplace pulsed like a living thing, with the calls of merchants offering spices in little cloth pouches, rolls of dyed linen, jars of fragrant oil. Above it all rose the hum of a city that believed itself eternal. Among the countless trades that thrived here were the workshops of the artisans, people whose skill was measured not only in precision, but in the weight of symbolism their creations carried. They were keepers of tradition and experimenters with form, as likely to preserve ancient patterns as to invent new ones. And it was in such a workshop, tucked behind a courtyard shaded by fig trees, that the artifact first began to take shape. Imagine that place, an open doorway, sunlight falling in angled beams, the floor swept but never truly clean. Along the walls, shelves groaned under the weight of tools, pigments, and rare materials gathered from near and far. In one corner, a low brazier glowed faintly, feeding warmth into the room. On a wooden table, worn smooth by decades of work, lay pieces that seemed ordinary at first glance. A small block of stone, a coil of fine wire, a sheet of hammered metal, but wood when assembled becomes something far greater. The master of this workshop was no stranger to commissions from the powerful. He had worked on ceremonial items for the temple, decorative fittings for the city's gates, and personal tokens for members of the royal court. But this task was different. The one who had ordered it had not given a full explanation, only that it must be both beautiful and enduring, capable of carrying a meaning that words alone could not express. It was to be a gift, or perhaps an offering, but of a kind whose significance would be understood only by a select few. The artisans began with sketches, lines drawn on scraps of parchment, each curve and angle argued over in low voices. They consulted the old designs stored in the guild's records, not to copy them, but to see what had lasted in the memory of generations past. Symbols from older civilizations were considered, the spiral that represented eternity, the interlocking knots that spoke of unity, the stylized bird that promised safe passage. Choices were made carefully, for every mark, every contour would carry weight. The materials, too, were chosen with a care bordering on reverence. Metal was sourced from far-off mines, brought by caravans that crossed dangerous deserts. A small fragment of polished stone was obtained from a quarry said to have been worked since the dawn of the city's history. Even the thread used in certain details came from a loom that had served the temple for decades. Nothing about this creation would be accidental. Day after day the work continued, unhurried, but purposeful. The sound of tools striking metal rang softly in the courtyard, joined by the slow scrape of stone being smoothed by hand. When the sun grew too hot, the artisans worked by the cool light filtering through woven reed blinds, their movements steady and deliberate. Each stroke was measured, each join inspected from every angle, and while the artisans worked, the city itself moved through its own cycles. Processions wound through the streets to honor the gods. Courtiers carried messages sealed in wax to distant embassies. In the harbor, ships arrived with goods from lands so far away, their names were spoken with a trace of disbelief. It was a time of outward confidence, though beneath the surface the first murmurs of unrest could be heard in the taverns and marketplaces. The artifact was born into a world both flourishing and fragile, a balance that would not last forever. When at last the work neared completion, the object that emerged was unlike anything the workshop had produced before. It was not overly large, but it carried a gravity that drew the eye. Its surfaces caught the light in subtle ways, revealing intricate patterns that seemed to shift as one looked at them. The design was harmonious, yet there was something slightly otherworldly about it, as if it belonged to both this world and another. The moment it was finished, it was placed not in the open for all to see, but in a cloth-lined chest, wrapped in layers of soft fabric. Only the commissioner and the artisans knew its full form. Those who had heard of it at all spoke of it in cautious tones, aware that this was no mere ornament. Some said it was meant for a ruler whose reign would be blessed by its possession. Others whispered that it was a tool for rites long forbidden, brought back into use under the cloak of secrecy. It was presented in a ceremony so private that no public record survives. What we know comes from a single hesitant note in a courtier's diary, describing the moment only as the unveiling of a gift that binds. No further explanation is given, leaving us to wonder what kind of binding was meant, a binding of alliances, of fates, or of something less tangible but more enduring. From that moment, the artifact was no longer simply a creation, it had become a bearer of meaning. It was spoken of not in the language of craftsmanship, but in the language of symbol and story. The city's powerful watched it with a kind of measured respect, aware that it could serve as both a blessing and a burden. The age that had given it birth was one of wonders, yes, but also one where wonders could be dangerous. And in that delicate space between admiration and caution, the artifact began the next chapter of its life, a chapter where its value would no longer be judged only by the skill of the hands that made it, but by the ways in which it would be used, guarded, coveted, and perhaps in time hidden. From the warmth of the workshop we move forward, toward the cooler chambers of the palace, and the shadowed corridors of power, where the artifact's transformation into something greater, and perhaps more perilous, was already quietly underway. The artifact's journey, from the hands of its makers to the inner chambers of power, was not merely a change of location, it was a transformation. Objects, once touched by the currents of human belief, begin to take on new lives. They cease to be just things, and become symbols. The artifact, though silent, began to speak in ways that words never could. At first, it was simply admired. Those who were permitted to see it, a privilege given to few, remarked on its craftsmanship, the precision of its form, the balance between beauty and purpose, but admiration alone cannot explain what happened next. Slowly the object became the center of quiet conversations and guarded glances. Stories began to attach themselves to it, like ivy climbing an ancient wall. Some said it had been made to seal a pact between two powerful factions within the city, a tangible promise that would outlast the signatures on parchment. Others whispered that it had been forged under auspicious stars, at a moment when the heavens themselves bent to watch over its creation. Such tales cannot be verified, and yet, in a world where superstition and statecraft often shared the same table, they found fertile ground. The court in which the artifact now resided was a place of calculated spectacle. Every gesture, Every object displayed was chosen with care to communicate status, legitimacy, and divine favor. In such an environment, the artifact was not simply a possession, it was a message. Its placement within the palace, the occasions upon which it was brought forth, the individuals allowed to approach it, all these choices told a story, one understood by those skilled in reading the language of power. It began to appear in ceremonies. Not often, and never without warning, but with enough frequency to weave itself into the rhythms of the court's life. Sometimes it was displayed during treaty signings, resting on a cloth of deep crimson as oaths were spoken. Other times it was present at religious rites, though always at a distance from the central altar, as though it were both part of the sacred proceedings and apart from them. Its role was never explained aloud, but the effect was undeniable. For those who believed in its mystical properties, the artifact was more than an emblem of unity or prestige. It was a talisman, a conduit for blessings, a shield against misfortune. Some claimed that in its presence, disputes resolved more easily and illnesses abated. A few went further, suggesting that it could influence the outcome of battles, not by force, but by turning the tide of fortune itself. The palace guards told their own stories. One swore that a thief who once tried to touch the artifact was struck blind for 3 days, his sight only returning after he begged forgiveness before the court. Another spoke of a strange stillness in the air whenever the object was moved, as if the world held its breath until it was settled again. These accounts were passed along in low tones, half cautionary tale, half quiet boast, and yet, not everyone saw it as a blessing. In a city as politically complex as this one, power in any form attracted both loyalty and fear. There were those who muttered that the artifact's influence was dangerous, that it bound the city to a fate chosen long ago, perhaps before any living ruler had taken the throne. Such people kept their doubts quiet, for to question the artifact was to question those who wielded it, a risk few were willing to take. Beyond the palace walls, its legend grew. Merchants in the marketplace told travelers of the object that could sway fortune. Pilgrims wove its story into their prayers. Artists, never having seen it, began to depict it in murals and mosaics, each imagining it differently, so that the artifact's image became many things at once. In some renderings, it gleamed with gold and gemstones, in others, it was carved of unadorned stone, pure and unyielding. The truth lay somewhere in between, but the multiplicity of visions only deepened its mystique. The artifact's journey into the realm of the symbolic was not sudden, it was a slow layering of meaning, like sediment building at the bottom of a river. Over the years, it gathered a history that was as much imagined as it was real. This was its power to be both known and unknown, to allow each observer to project their hopes, fears, and interpretations onto it. Within the court, a ritual emerged. On certain nights of the year, when the moon reached a particular height in the sky, the artifact would be brought to a secluded chamber lit only by oil lamps. Here a small circle of the most trusted advisors and priests would gather. They would speak in hushed voices, their words a mixture of counsel and invocation. The artifact would rest at the center of the room, silent, unchanging, but somehow commanding the attention of every soul present. What was said in those gatherings never reached the public ear. Outside that inner circle, speculation flourished. Was the artifact consulted before major decisions? Did it hold some hidden mechanism or inscription that only a select few could read? Was it, as one particularly daring rumor claimed, a fragment of something far older than the city itself, preserved through ages as kingdoms rose and fell? None could say for certain, and the absence of clear answers only fed the hunger for them. It is here in this transformation from treasured possession to object of reverence that the artifact's fate was sealed. The more meaning people gave it, the more inseparable it became from the destiny of the city. It was no longer simply a thing that could be owned, it had become an idea, a presence, a force that shaped events without ever lifting a finger. But such power, even when veiled in ceremony and tradition, carries a weight, and in time, that weight would draw the attention of those who sought to claim it for themselves, not for the artistry it embodied, but for the authority it conferred. The artifact had been created to endure, but now it was also coveted, and coveting leads to risk. As the seasons turned and the city's fortunes shifted, the artifact's dual nature, beauty and danger, blessing and burden, became impossible to ignore. Somewhere in the shadows, beyond the palace gates, eyes were watching, calculating, waiting. For those in the court, the artifact was a talisman of protection. For others, it was a prize worth any cost. And so, without a single change to its surface, the artifact began its next transformation. From talisman, it would soon become something else entirely, an object pursued, stolen, hidden. The hands that had once shaped it in peace could not have imagined the paths it was about to travel, nor the darkness into which it would one day disappear. It is often in the quietest hours, when the city sleeps and the lamps along the streets burn low, that history changes course. The theft of the artifact did not take place in broad daylight, nor under the gaze of the crowded marketplace. It happened in the hush between midnight and dawn, in a silence so deep that even the dogs in the palace courtyard did not bark. The court had long guarded the artifact, with a combination of ceremony and secrecy. Few were allowed near it, fewer still permitted to handle it. Yet no lock, no guard, no ritual can entirely seal away something that is both beautiful and desired. Desire once planted, grows roots in hidden places. Somewhere in the winding streets beyond the palace gates, those roots had been growing for years. We do not know the names of those who took it. In the official records, there is no mention of the theft at all. Instead, the palace archives skip over the event entirely, moving from one ceremony to the next, as if nothing had happened. It is in the private journals, the hurried letters, and the fragments of testimony, whispered long after the fact, that we catch our first glimpse of the truth. One such account, written in the slanted hand of a palace servant, describes the night as unusually still. The air was heavy, as though a storm were waiting just beyond the hills, though no rain fell. The guards walked their usual rounds, their armor glinting faintly in the lamplight. Nothing seemed amiss, until it was too late. The intruders, if indeed they were intruders, and not insiders, moved like water through the palace. They left no signs of forced entry, no broken locks or shattered doors. Some say they possessed the keys, others that they knew the patterns of the guards so well they could slip between them like shadows passing through moonlight. However they did it, their approach was patient and deliberate. The chamber that held the artifact was not large, but it was layered with barriers. The first was a heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron bands. The second, a smaller inner gate, locked with a mechanism whose design had been kept secret for generations. Beyond that lay the artifact itself, resting on a low pedestal, draped in cloth, the air around it faintly scented with cedar and oil from the lamps. The servant's account stops short at the moment of entry. It tells instead of the morning after, of the sharp intake of breath from the first guard to enter the room, of the spreading murmur through the palace corridors, of the way the court moved quickly to contain the news. Within hours, the chamber was sealed. Those who knew what had happened were summoned for questioning. Those who did not were given no reason to suspect. But beyond the walls, rumors began to slip through like light through a cracked shutter. They spoke of a daring theft, of cloaked figures vanishing into the night, of a single rider spotted at the city's edge before dawn. Some insisted the artifact had been spirited away to a rival court, offered in exchange for gold or influence. Others believed it had been taken by a secretive religious sect, one that saw it as a divine object wrongly kept from their rituals. There were darker theories still. A handful of stories claimed the artifact had not been stolen at all, but moved deliberately by those within the court, hidden away to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands, or perhaps to break its influence over the city. In these tellings, the thieves were not thieves, but custodians, acting under orders that would never be written down. What is certain is that the artifact vanished without trace. In the days and weeks that followed, the palace carried on as though nothing had happened. Ceremonies continued. Treaties were signed, the great festivals came and went, but something subtle had shifted. The court moved with a warrior grace, as if aware that one of its invisible foundations had been disturbed. Outside, the common people turned the loss into a kind of legend. Street performers told tales of how the artifact had escaped on its own, slipping away under the cover of mist. Poets likened it to a caged bird finally taking flight. In these retellings, the theft became less an act of greed and more an act of fate, as though the artifact itself had chosen to leave. We cannot know what happened in those first hours after it was taken. Did the thieves ride hard through the night, the artifact strapped securely in a chest? Did they hide in the city for days, passing unnoticed among the crowds until it was safe to move, or did they vanish so completely that even the most determined pursuit could not find them? The answers lie somewhere in the gaps of the record, in the silences history leaves behind. What we do know is that the artifact began a new life that night, no longer a talisman, confined to the rituals of the court. It entered the uncertain realm of objects in motion, things traded, smuggled, concealed and coveted by those outside the boundaries of its birthplace. In leaving the palace, it also left the rigid meanings that had been placed upon it. For those who believed in its power, this was a dangerous time. Without the protections of the court, the artifact might be misused, its blessings turned to curses. For others, it was an opportunity, a chance to possess something that could alter the balance of power in their favor. The theft marked the first true rupture in the artifact's history, the first moment when its fate was no longer controlled by those who had commissioned it. From this point forward, it would pass through hands that saw it not as a sacred emblem but as a prize to be claimed. And in that shift, the artifact's mystery only deepened. Even now, centuries later, the theft is remembered less as a crime and more as a turning point. In the quiet of night, when the city sleeps and the wind moves softly through its narrow streets, one can imagine the faint sound of footsteps in the dark, the kind that leave no trace, carrying with them something that should never have been taken, yet somehow was. For centuries, the artifact did not simply lie in a vault of stone and shadow. It lived under the quiet vigilance of those who considered it both a treasure and a burden. These were the guardians, men and women, whose names rarely passed into written record, but whose devotion formed an unbroken chain between the past and the present. In every generation, a few were chosen, sworn into service by oath and ritual. They were told not the full story of what they protected. No single guardian ever knew all of it, but enough to instill a sense of awe and gravity. This secrecy was not cruelty, it was protection. If one could not speak what one did not know, then the artifact's greatest mysteries could never be betrayed. The role of guardian was often inherited, passed from parent to child. Yet not every heir accepted the burden, and when they did not, the responsibility fell to a trusted outsider, someone whose loyalty was proven through years of quiet service. In a way, the artifact chose its protectors as much as they chose it. Stories were told in whispers of candidates who faltered under the weight of their duty, and of others who embraced it so completely that they lived their entire lives in near seclusion, tending the vault as if it were a living being. The vault's air was thick with the smell of stone and oil, and the guardians knew each sound it made, every creak of the timbers, every groan of the iron door, every whisper of dust drifting down from the ancient ceiling. These protectors did more than guard. They maintained the conditions of preservation. They learned how to keep humidity at bay, using simple ancient methods. They lit fires in the cold months, to ward off the chill that might seep into the walls and damage the artifact. And when storms shook the earth and rain battered the roof above, they listened, always alert to the faintest sound of water finding its way through. A single leak could mean disaster. In this way, their work was both menial and monumental, a daily routine that carried the weight of centuries. Over time, traditions grew around their watch. Each guardian would add a small mark to a hidden wall, a carving, a symbol, a single word, leaving behind proof that they had stood in the long line of those who came before. Some marks were intricate, and took days to complete. Others were barely more than a scratched initial. All of them together told a secret history of the keepers themselves. In the dim light of the vault, those carvings were like constellations on a stone sky, a silent testament to devotion. The world outside shifted and transformed with the centuries. Kingdoms rose and fell, roads changed course, wars came and went. Yet inside the vault, time seemed to hold its breath. The guardians were aware of the outside world, but they lived on the margins of it, bound by duty. Some historians later wondered if these keepers ever felt bitterness for the lives they might have led, had they been free. Records suggest a more complicated truth. Many of them saw their service as a privilege, even a calling. The vault became their sanctuary, and in guarding the artifact, they found a sense of identity that outlasted fleeting titles and borders. There were, however, moments of danger, times when the outside world came too close. One story tells of a night when raiders, unaware of what lay hidden, attempted to break into the building above the vault. The guardian of that era, an aging man with failing sight, lured them away with a torch and the illusion of valuable goods. He led them into the surrounding woods, disappearing into the darkness. By dawn, the artifact remained untouched, and the raiders were gone, either lost or unwilling to return. In another tale, during a civil conflict, the guardians disguised the vault's entrance entirely, sealing it with stone and earth so skillfully that it appeared to be part of the natural ground. It would remain concealed for over a decade, until the danger had passed. But the duty was not only physical, it was spiritual. Before taking up their role, each new guardian underwent a ritual that blended faith, symbolism, and the weight of oral tradition. They were told to place their hand upon the vault's cold stone, and to speak a vow, not of ownership, but of stewardship. This vow was considered binding not only in life, but in death. Some believed that a guardian's spirit lingered near the vault long after their body had been laid to rest. Such beliefs created an unspoken reassurance. Even in the stillness of the night, the artifact was never truly alone. Guardians kept records of their watch, but these were never written in plain language. Instead, they used codes, symbols, and phrases that would mean nothing to an outsider. These journals, some still preserved, speak in riddles of the sleeping heart or the circle unbroken, leaving modern scholars to puzzle over their meanings. Yet for those who knew, such language was clear, a shorthand for events, threats, or changes in the artifact's condition. The guardians spoke through generations, their cryptic words forming a hidden chronicle that parallels the history of nations. When a guardian's time came to an end, the passing of the role was marked by a quiet ceremony. There were no crowds, no public acknowledgements, just the new keeper and the one departing. A key might be handed over, or a certain stone in the wall pressed to reveal a mechanism known only to them. Sometimes the older guardian would leave a personal token behind, a ring, a piece of cloth, a scrap of parchment with a line of advice. These tokens were rarely removed. Instead, they accumulated in small alcoves and hidden shelves, a growing archive of intimate, wordless farewells. Yet there were instances when the chain of guardianship was broken. Plague, war, or natural disaster could take a keeper before they had named a successor. In such moments, the artifact stood vulnerable, its survival dependent on the secrecy of its location and the resilience of its vault. Some believe that in those gaps the artifact may have come perilously close to being lost forever, and still, by luck or fate, or perhaps the very hand of history itself, it endured. Through all these centuries, the guardians became as much a part of the artifact's story as the object itself. Without them, the vault would have been just a structure, and the artifact merely another relic. But with their watchful presence, the artifact's journey became something greater, a living thread of human devotion woven through the vast tapestry of time. It is in this interplay, between object and protector, between stillness and vigilance, that the real mystery lies. We may never know every name, every face, every thought that passed in those dim chambers. But we can know this, for all the forces of time, decay and ambition that might have claimed the artifact, the hands that guarded it stood firm. And so, in the quiet hours, when the night was deep and the world outside forgot itself, the guardians kept their post. They were the breathing silence of history, the steady heartbeats in the dark, the reason the artifact survived to be wondered at centuries later. Without them, there would be no story to tell, only an empty place where something precious once was. Time has a way of swallowing even the grandest of wonders. After its moment in the sun, the artifact slipped into the long shadow of obscurity, not through any single act of malice, but through the quiet, indifferent erosion of memory. In dusty storerooms and neglected vaults, it became a thing unseen and unspoken, its name absent from inventories, its image absent from the minds of those who might have cherished it. Centuries passed in this state of near invisibility, and while kingdoms rose and fell outside its resting place, the artifact lay untouched, a silent witness to time's endless procession. The room that cradled it was no longer a place of honor, but of storage. Once polished surfaces grew dull with layers of dust. Once proud inscriptions faded under the slow abrasion of years. No candlelight flickered to illuminate its form. No curious eyes lingered to wonder at its meaning. The artifact existed in a kind of suspended exile, still present in the world, yet absent from its story. It was neither revered nor destroyed, only ignored, which in some ways is the cruelest fate of all. Outside those walls, the world's attention shifted to other treasures, other mysteries. Wars redrew maps, merchants sailed to distant ports, scholars pursued new ideas. The artifact's tale was buried, not beneath soil, but beneath the endless tide of human distraction. People forgot, not because they wished to, but because memory is fragile, easily replaced by what feels more urgent in the present moment. The once sacred was relegated to the status of the ordinary, until it no longer stirred even a whisper in the air. Yet even in its obscurity, the artifact was not entirely alone. Time, though silent, is never idle. Tiny motes of dust swirled in the stagnant air. The wood of nearby shelves creaked under their own slow decay. The faint scent of parchment and stone lingered like a ghost of the past. In the absence of human attention, the artifact seemed to settle deeper into its own mystery, its very stillness, gathering weight, as if waiting for the right moment to return. Generations came and went without ever knowing it existed. A handful of caretakers, minor officials, junior archivists, might have glimpsed it while cataloguing forgotten shelves, but their records were lost, their notes misplaced, their lives too fleeting to rekindle its significance. Some may have sensed it was old, perhaps valuable, but without context or a name it was simply another relic among thousands. Without a story to frame it, the artifact could not speak for itself. This long sleep, centuries of quiet neglect, was paradoxically both a curse and a blessing. It was cursed in the sense that it was denied its rightful place in the collective memory of humankind, but it was blessed too, for the same obscurity shielded it from theft, war, and the rough handling of curiosity. While other artifacts were melted down for their metals, shattered for their gems, or repurposed in times of scarcity, this one remained intact precisely because no one thought to covet it. Somewhere in the middle of its forgotten centuries, a rare faint mention appeared in a handwritten ledger. The note was vague, merely an entry that hinted at an object of unknown origin in poor light. Perhaps this was the echo of someone who had glimpsed its form and sensed something more. But that small spark of recognition was too faint to ignite a revival. The mention faded into the sea of archival obscurity, a lonely attempt to bridge the gap between the artifact and the world. It is strange to think that while centuries of history unfolded, epidemics sweeping across continents, cities falling to conquerors, revolutions toppling empires, the artifact's life was one of pure stillness. The walls around it may have shaken from distant thunder or muffled cannon fire, but its immediate world remained almost unchanged. In this way, it became a perfect time capsule, untouched by the passing fashions and ideologies that consumed the outside world. The forgotten years are not just a gap in its story, they are part of the story itself. They are the silent pages that make the eventual rediscovery all the more startling, as if the artifact had been holding its breath for centuries. Its survival through this long exile is as remarkable as its creation, a testament to the strange protection of obscurity. And when its moment finally came to step back into the light, the contrast between centuries of stillness and the sudden rush of recognition would make that moment feel almost like resurrection. For now, in this chapter of its existence, the artifact belongs to the quiet. No one visits, no one records, no one wonders. It rests under the watch of shadows, waiting without knowing it, waits. Outside, the world moves on, chasing new glories and forgetting old ones. Inside, the air is still, the dust undisturbed, and the centuries stretch on like an endless night. The locked room is more than just a sealed chamber. It is a place where centuries have passed in silence, and yet the air seems thick with stories waiting to be told. Imagine approaching its heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron bands that have rusted into shades of deep brown and black. The keyhole is small, almost shy, but its edges are worn from hands that once turned a key in it long ago. It is said that the door has not been opened in living memory, and yet there are those who swear they have heard faint noises from within, a scrape like wood against stone, or a sigh that might have been the wind, or something else entirely. The village elders recall tales of a night long ago when the door rattled without cause, and a watchman posted nearby ran away in terror, refusing to return. Was it just the shifting of ancient timbers, or was the artifact inside, whatever it is, trying to speak? Such accounts have fed the imagination for generations, giving the locked room an aura not just of secrecy, but of quiet menace. The idea that something hidden for so long might still be alive in some way is as unsettling as it is intriguing. Inside, according to old maps and structural diagrams, the chamber is no larger than a modest storeroom. Yet its position is curious. It lies behind two corridors that lead nowhere else, a dead end of architecture, as though intentionally tucked away from the rest of the building. Some architectural historians suggest this was deliberate, a hidden heart where a valued object could be kept away from prying eyes and idle hands. When the building's current caretakers walk past that section of the hallway, they claim the air feels different, cooler, perhaps, and faintly scented with something indefinable. Dust, yes, but also an undercurrent of resin or oil, as though the wood inside has been preserved far beyond its years. Those who linger too long near the door sometimes report a strange pressure in their ears, the way one might feel before a storm. And yet, the locked room remains unopened, its contents untouched. Scholars have debated endlessly on what might be inside. Some point to old shipping manifests that list one chest, bound in iron, of unknown contents, delivered to the building in the late 1600s. Others believe the artifact is far older, perhaps brought here from distant lands by a merchant who wished to keep it from thieves, or from those who might use it. The mystery deepens when you consider the peculiar incident of 1824. A ledger entry from that year records a sudden expense, the replacement of the door's hinges, ordered in haste, after a failure in their integrity. No further details are given, but one wonders what could cause century-old iron to fail so suddenly. Was someone trying to break in, or was something trying to get out? Adding to the intrigue is the fact that in the mid-23rd century, an attempt was made to open the locked room for inventory purposes. The appointed locksmith reported that the keyhole was blocked from the inside, as though something had been wedged into it. Strangely, no one pursued the matter further, and the order to open the room was quietly withdrawn. To this day, the reason remains unknown. For those who have studied the history of artifacts and the ways they are kept, the locked room is a case study in how secrecy can grow into legend. The less people know, the more they imagine, and the more they imagine, the more the mystery becomes real in their minds. Whether it holds a priceless relic, a dangerous object, or simply an empty box wrapped in centuries of dust, the locked room has achieved a kind of immortality in local memory. But perhaps the most haunting detail is this: sometimes, on winter nights when the building settles in the cold, a sound can be heard from that section of the hall. It is not loud, barely audible, really, but it is rhythmic, almost like the faint beat of a heart. The rational mind insists it is nothing more than wood and iron shifting with the temperature, and yet some who have heard it walk away with an unshakable feeling that the locked room is not simply storing something, it is guarding it. And as we leave this shadowed hallway behind, we carry with us the sense that the artifact inside has not been forgotten, not by history, not by the walls, and perhaps not even by itself. The next part of our journey will lead us into the earliest known records that mention the artifact, seeking to separate fact from legend. But even then, we may find that truth is as elusive as the whispers from the locked room. Legends have a way of clinging to objects, like ivy entwining itself around old stone walls. The artifact, though mute in its material form, seemed to speak in countless voices across the centuries. Ancient poets claimed it was forged, not by human hands, but by divine ones, a gift, or perhaps a curse, placed upon mortals. Some whispered that it contained a fragment of celestial light, captured in a vessel so that it might never be lost to the night. Others told darker tales, that it was the remnant of a fallen star, carrying with it the grief and wrath of the heavens. In the villages nearest to the last recorded location of the artifact, oral traditions flourished. By the light of oil lamps, elders spoke of strange occurrences that accompanied its passing through their lands. A year of abundant harvest, followed by a season of famine, a river that changed its course overnight, a sudden illness that struck the strongest of men. Each story bore the rhythm of cautionary folklore, passed down not just to entertain, but to warn. Travelers who came across these stories often carried them far beyond their place of origin, and like a river branching into many streams, the legends transformed with each retelling. In one port city's version, the artifact was said to grant safe passage across treacherous seas, so long as the captain offered a silver coin at dawn. In another landlocked kingdom, the same object was believed to bring ruin if ever exposed to the light of the full moon. These contradictions puzzled scholars, but for the storytellers the truth was never the point, the telling was. Over time, the line between history and legend grew so faint that even the most dedicated chroniclers could not clearly separate them. Was the object truly the cause of the strange phenomena recorded in old journals, or had the people of each age woven it into their own fears and hopes, making it a vessel for human imagination rather than a relic of actual power? The truth seemed to shift depending on who held the pen or spoke the words, and yet the persistence of these tales suggested something more than mere invention. The artifact's presence in collective memory, across regions, languages, and centuries, hinted at a core truth hidden within the embellishments. Perhaps the object was neither wholly divine nor wholly ordinary, but something in between, a creation that resonated deeply with human longing for meaning. As we turn from these legends toward the documented accounts of those who sought the artifact, we move from the realm of fireside whispers into the world of explorers, chroniclers, and rulers, each with their own reasons for chasing the truth behind the myth. For some it was curiosity, for others, ambition, and for a few perhaps it was an unshakable belief that the whispers of the ancients were not just stories, but warnings. The earliest recorded attempts to find the artifact came during an age when kingdoms measured their strength not only in armies and gold, but in the possession of wonders. The stories of the object's power had reached the courts of ambitious rulers, and for some, the idea of controlling it was as alluring as conquering new lands. Chroniclers speak of the first great expedition as both a feat of courage and a folly born of greed. This initial search was commissioned by a monarch whose reign was marked by restless ambition. He gathered an assembly of cartographers, linguists, merchants, and soldiers, each chosen for a specific skill. The cartographers would study the oldest maps, hoping to match ancient place names to their modern counterparts. The linguists would decode faded inscriptions found on clay tablets and temple walls. Merchants, with their wide networks, could provide intelligence on distant lands. And soldiers, seasoned in foreign campaigns, would protect the mission from whatever dangers lay ahead, whether human or otherwise. Their journey began in the heart of the capital, with banners raised and drums beating a steady rhythm. Crowds gathered along the streets to watch them depart, some cheering, others muttering quiet prayers. In the eyes of the people, this was more than a royal expedition, it was a moment when their kingdom's fate might change. Success could mean untold wealth and prestige, failure could mean wasted lives and empty coffers. The expedition traveled first to lands known for their archives of ancient knowledge. In the libraries of a desert kingdom, they uncovered scrolls that mentioned a stone of light, hidden beyond the valley where rivers vanish. In the mountain monasteries of a distant province, they found frescoes depicting a glowing object, cradled in the hands of beings neither fully human nor fully divine. Each clue was tantalizing but incomplete. Like fragments of a puzzle scattered across the world, weeks turned to months, and the hardships of the road began to take their toll. Supplies dwindled faster than anticipated, and the varied languages and customs of foreign lands brought misunderstandings that nearly derailed their mission. At one point, a dispute with a local ruler over passage rights nearly erupted into violence, only to be settled with a lavish gift and a promise of shared spoils if the artifact was found. Their trail eventually led them to a remote valley, surrounded by jagged cliffs, where an ancient settlement lay in ruins. Here they found what appeared to be an altar, carved from a single block of obsidian, its surface etched with symbols no one in the party could read. Though they camped there for weeks, studying the site and sending messengers to nearby villages for any scraps of lore, no sign of the artifact emerged. When they finally returned home, empty-handed but rich in stories, the mood was mixed. The king welcomed them with honors, declaring their discoveries valuable in their own right, yet his eyes betrayed disappointment, for the artifact had not been found, and the promise of its power remained just beyond reach. Still, their journey had planted a seed. Other rulers and adventurers, hearing of their route and their findings, began to dream of mounting searches of their own. The first great expedition had not brought the treasure itself, but it had opened the path for countless others to try. The moment the narrative enters the realm of the forbidden chamber, the atmosphere tightens like the hush that falls before a storm. Here in the deepest, least accessible part of the structure that holds the artifact, lies a room untouched by sunlight for centuries. Walls seem to lean inward, as if conspiring to protect whatever lies within. The air carries a stillness so profound that even one's own breath feels intrusive. The passage leading here is narrow, deliberately so, perhaps intended to deter intruders or to force a visitor into humility before entry. The chamber's door is unlike any other in the building, reinforced, layered with metals foreign to the region, its hinges hidden, its locking mechanism, a mystery even to those who maintain the outer rooms. Over time, rumors have clung to this threshold. Some say it was sealed by an ancient priesthood that feared the object's powers. Others whisper it was locked from the inside, trapping not an object, but something or someone within. This ambiguity, the duality of sacred sanctuary versus eternal prison, feeds the mind with images both wondrous and unsettling. As one crosses into the chamber, a sudden temperature shift is felt, not cold exactly, but dense, like the air has weight. It smells faintly of minerals, old wood, and a dryness that suggests centuries of undisturbed air. The floor is made of a darker stone than the rest of the structure, polished not by human footfall, but by the settling of time itself. Intricate carvings wind along the walls, each depicting scenes that are nearly impossible to decipher fully, processions of robed figures, celestial maps, and in one section, a spiral that seems to draw the eye inward, no matter how one tries to look away. The artifact is not immediately visible. Instead, there is a raised dais at the center, draped in a cloth so aged that it seems to crumble at the edges. No obvious light source illuminates the dais, yet somehow it is the brightest point in the room, as though the stone beneath it remembers light. Here the viewer senses a turning point in the story. This is no longer about history alone, but about intention. Someone designed this space to create an experience, to manipulate the emotions and thoughts of the one who entered. Moving closer, faint inscriptions become visible on the dais. They are not written in any known language, though some symbols echo those seen in early Mesopotamian or Proto-Indo-European scripts. This blending of styles hints at a civilization that either traveled widely or existed at a crossroads of multiple cultures. One line curves upward, wrapping around itself, perhaps suggesting eternity or a cycle that repeats. Another depicts a hand holding a sphere, from which lines radiate outward like beams of light or threads of influence. The forbidden nature of this chamber has always been tied to the belief that once the artifact is touched, it alters something, not just in the world, but in the person. Some accounts describe newfound visions or dreams that reveal distant places and events. Others tell of unsettling changes in personality, as though the artifact chooses a bearer not for their worthiness, but for their susceptibility. In quiet tones, some caretakers have admitted they believe the chamber itself tests those who enter, weighing their intentions against an unknown measure. What makes the mystery deeper is that even those who have worked in the surrounding halls for decades have never seen the artifact uncovered. It is always described as beneath a layer of cloth, beneath layers of meaning, beneath centuries of silence. The restraint is deliberate. The less that is revealed, the greater the pull of imagination. And perhaps that is the point, that the chamber guards not only an object, but the very hunger to know it. This section lingers here deliberately, letting the listener's mind explore the edges of the unknown. The chamber becomes a mental space as much as a physical one, a place where the rational historian and the dreamer within meet in uneasy harmony. It is the heart of the story's tension. The artifact is near, and yet it remains untouchable. From here the narrative will move toward attempts to unlock not just the door but the meaning of what lies within, bridging from the stillness of reverence to the restless urge to uncover the truth. There is a peculiar magnetism in places that are locked away, not merely with keys and bolts, but with layers of silence, secrecy, and deliberate forgetting. Deep within the structure where the artifact slumbers, there exists such a place, the Forbidden Chamber. Over time it has acquired many names, some whispered by candlelight, others recorded in hesitant ink on half-burnt parchment. For some it is a vault of preservation, for others it is a prison for things better left untouched. To approach this chamber is to step into a realm where the air itself seems reluctant to stir. Dust motes drift in heavy, slow spirals, as if even the smallest particles understand the weight of what lies within. The doorway, arched in a style now absent from modern architecture, bears carvings whose meaning has been eroded by centuries. Yet certain symbols remain stubbornly visible: spirals, eyes and serpentine curves, reminders that the builders wished to speak across the ages, even if their language is no longer fully understood. Historical accounts describe the room as sealed during a time of great turmoil. Some records claim that during a civil war, treasures and documents were hidden away to keep them safe from destruction. Others whisper of more unsettling motives, that the object inside was thought to exert a corrupting influence, sowing discord and obsession among those who handled it. In one brittle letter from a monastery scribe, there is a single chilling line: "To see it is to want it, and to want it is to lose yourself." The chamber's existence was not always known. For centuries, its location was lost to crumbling maps and fading memory. It was only during a renovation some decades ago that workers stumbled upon the faint outline of a sealed doorway behind a wall of plaster and oak. The decision to reopen it sparked fierce debate. Scholars argued that the pursuit of knowledge demanded the chamber be explored. Others urged caution, citing old warnings and the strange fates of those who had once possessed the artifact. Ultimately, the chamber was unlocked for a brief, carefully controlled investigation, an event that has since become the subject of rumor and intrigue. Descriptions from that brief opening are scarce, but they speak of an oppressive stillness, as though sound itself was hesitant to enter the room. Light from the lanterns seemed to falter near the center, where the artifact rested within a case of darkened glass. The walls were lined with shelves bearing scrolls and small relics, items perhaps meant to guard or complement the central object. Some claim that an unmarked urn in the corner emitted a faint, continuous hum, though others dismiss this as the trembling of the wooden floorboards. The most haunting detail comes from an unnamed witness who later confided to a colleague that, upon seeing the artifact, they felt as though time momentarily folded in on itself. In that instant, they reported a flood of images, unfamiliar landscapes, forgotten rituals, and a sense of standing both in the present and the deep past. Whether this was a product of imagination, the dim lighting, or something stranger remains unknown. Following this limited exploration, the chamber was sealed once more, though not entirely in secret. Official statements claimed the closure was for preservation purposes, to protect the contents from further decay. Yet the choice to lock it away again, with no announced plans for future study, has only fueled speculation. Did the investigators see something they could not explain? Did they fear that the artifact's influence was more than legend? The legend of the Forbidden Chamber has since grown beyond its stone walls. Artists have painted it cloaked in shadows, novelists have woven it into their stories, and local guides, half in jest, half in awe, point to a particular section of the building where they swear they can feel a chill emanating from behind the bricks. And so, even as its doors remain shut, the chamber lives on in the collective imagination, a place where history and mystery refuse to part ways. As we leave the silent corridors and the sealed entrance behind, we carry with us not just the facts of the chamber's existence, but the questions it raises. What could be so powerful, so unsettling, that it must be hidden from the world, and how much longer can such a secret remain untouched? In the quiet corridors of speculation, scholars, dreamers, and even the most cautious curators have spun countless theories about what the artifact might truly be. Some view it through the lens of practicality. Perhaps it was a tool, a device meant to serve a forgotten craft or ritual, its design so advanced for its time that it appears almost alien to us now. Others approach it with reverence, believing it to be a sacred object, imbued with spiritual or ceremonial power, created not merely to be used, but to connect its keeper with forces beyond the visible world. This interpretation leans heavily on patterns etched along its surface, markings that seem deliberate, symbolic, and yet unreadable. One school of thought entertains the possibility that the artifact is a cipher, a container not of physical goods, but of knowledge. According to this idea, the patterns and inlays are not ornamental but linguistic, representing a coded language or map. Here the artifact transforms from a piece of ancient craftsmanship into a message across time, awaiting someone patient and intuitive enough to hear its voice. The notion is intoxicating because it shifts the artifact from being a relic of the past to an active participant in the present, still holding its secrets close. A more radical theory suggests origins far outside human history as we record it. Proponents of this view, a mixture of serious fringe researchers and speculative historians, point to aspects of the artifact's construction that defy conventional explanation. The materials, some claim, include alloys that should not have existed in the age it was supposedly made. Under magnification, certain surfaces appear almost machined with modern precision, leading to conjecture about lost civilizations with advanced technology or even intervention from beyond our world. It is a theory that many in academia dismiss, but one that continues to draw public fascination precisely because it resists easy dismissal. The artifact has also inspired psychological and symbolic interpretations. To some, It is less important what the object actually is and more about what it represents, the enduring human yearning to connect with something greater than ourselves. Whether it was once held by a priestess, a king, or a wandering craftsman, it likely meant something profound to the one who possessed it. In this way, its mystery is as much about them as it is about the object. Was it a gift, a token of alliance, a declaration of love or loyalty? Or was it a talisman meant to protect, to inspire, or to guide? These questions make the artifact not merely a thing, but a story in material form. One of the more haunting theories is that the artifact's purpose was never meant to be understood outside its original context, that its meaning is locked not only by time, but by the cultural and spiritual framework of the people who made it. In this sense, the artifact is like a fragment of a dream, vivid, real, yet impossible to fully explain upon waking. Its existence teases us with the certainty that there was once a world where it was clear, obvious, and essential, a world we can never fully return to. As each theory competes with the others, none manages to close the case. Instead, the debates themselves become part of the artifact's ongoing story. Theories rise and fall in fashion, evidence emerges and erodes, but the object remains, silent, unmoved, and perhaps amused by our endless attempts to solve it. This living tension between what we know and what we can never know ensures the artifact will never simply be a static museum piece. It will remain a wellspring of curiosity, an object that draws the mind inward and onward, deeper into the realm of possibility. The mystery is the point. If one theory were ever proven beyond doubt, the artifact might lose some of its spell over us, but as long as its purpose remains uncertain, it invites each new generation to look again, to dream again, and to find in its quiet presence a reflection of our own desire to understand the unreachable. The next section will follow this thread into how the artifact has influenced art, literature, and popular imagination, where mystery becomes muse and history becomes legend. The story of the Golden City did not end with its disappearance beneath the sands. Like a ghost whispering through history, the legend persisted, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge into the collective imagination. For centuries, the tales of this lost metropolis drifted through scholarly debates, travelers' journals, and the dreams of adventurers. It was in the age of exploration and archaeology that interest in the Golden City flared once more, sparking an era of rediscovery and fascination that continues to this day. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, advances in cartography, transportation, and archaeology made it possible to reach regions that had been previously inaccessible. Expeditions set out with new technology, improved navigation instruments, detailed maps drawn from earlier surveys, and equipment for preserving artifacts in the field. These expeditions often began with vague rumors and oral traditions, guided by the memories of local tribes or cryptic clues hidden in ancient texts. For many of these explorers, the Golden City represented not just a physical location, but a test of human determination, intellect, and endurance. The rediscovery process was rarely straightforward. Initial expeditions often returned empty-handed, but each failure added pieces to the puzzle. Broken pottery shards, weathered stone carvings, and fragments of decorative metalwork were painstakingly catalogued, compared, and analyzed. These small finds suggested that beneath the dunes and vegetation lay the remnants of a once thriving civilization. The academic world took notice. Universities and museums began funding expeditions, transforming the quest from a personal obsession of a few dreamers into a collaborative, multinational effort. As discoveries accumulated, scholars pieced together an image of the Golden City's past grandeur. Advanced irrigation channels hinted at an agricultural sophistication well ahead of its time. Ornate architectural remnants revealed a mastery of design and engineering. Decorative motifs suggested both local innovation and influences from distant lands, implying that the Golden City was a hub of cultural exchange. These findings stirred debates about its role in ancient trade networks. Was it a local powerhouse, or part of a vast interconnected civilization? The Golden City's reappearance in modern consciousness also fueled public fascination. Popular newspapers and illustrated magazines carried romanticized accounts of the expeditions, often exaggerating the dangers faced by explorers. Poisonous snakes, treacherous rivers, and hostile weather were described with dramatic flair. The public devoured these stories, and soon the Golden City was as much a pop culture icon as it was an archaeological site. Adventure novels, serialized in weekly papers, used it as the backdrop for thrilling tales of danger and discovery. The mid-20th century brought another leap in research capabilities. Aerial photography, and later, satellite imagery, allowed archaeologists to detect subtle ground patterns invisible from the surface. These methods revealed geometric outlines, rectangular grids, circular plazas, and long straight avenues, hidden beneath layers of earth and vegetation. Suddenly the Golden City was no longer an abstract legend, it was a tangible archaeological landscape waiting to be mapped and understood. In the 21st century, technology accelerated rediscovery even further. Ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR scans stripped away the topsoil in virtual models, showing the precise layout of buildings, roads, and water systems. Digital reconstructions brought these findings to life, allowing people around the world to walk through virtual simulations of the city as it might have looked at its peak. The Golden City was no longer confined to dusty reports, it became a living experience, accessible to anyone with an internet connection. Modern fascination with the Golden City has taken many forms. For some, it is a historical and scientific marvel, a place where archaeology, anthropology, and engineering intersect. For others, it remains a symbol of adventure and the human longing to uncover hidden truths. Tourists flock to the region, eager to see even a fragment of the ancient walls or stand in the plazas where traders once exchanged goods and stories. Documentaries, podcasts, and museum exhibitions present the city's story in captivating detail, blending hard science with the enduring romance of exploration. Yet even with all these advances, mysteries remain. Many structures are still buried, their contents unknown. The exact reasons for the city's decline are still debated. Was it climate change, resource depletion, invasion, or a combination of factors? And perhaps most tantalizing of all, are there still undiscovered chambers, artifacts, or writings that could rewrite what we know about this civilization? The rediscovery of the Golden City is not just about unearthing stones and artifacts, it is about reviving a lost chapter of human history. Each discovery deepens the connection between past and present, reminding us that civilizations, no matter how great, can vanish, leaving only whispers for future generations to follow. The fascination endures, because the Golden City represents the perfect blend of history and mystery, proof that even in our modern mapped-out world, there are still wonders to be found if one has the curiosity to seek them. As the Golden City reached the later centuries of its existence, the signs of decline began to emerge, though at first they were faint, subtle enough to be ignored by those who still believed in its unshakable greatness. In the markets, merchants who once traded exotic silks, rare spices, and precious stones began to complain that fewer caravans were arriving from distant lands. The flow of wealth that had once seemed eternal began to slow, like a mighty river, losing its current. The great warehouses that had overflowed with goods started to echo with emptiness, and the tax coffers that funded the city's festivals, roads, and defenses grew lighter each year. Yet on the palace balconies, the nobility still toasted to prosperity, refusing to acknowledge the changing tide. Internally, the government grew more divided. Ministers and court officials, once united in the vision of the city's expansion and glory, fell into petty rivalries and power struggles. While some sought reforms to stabilize the economy and protect the borders, others schemed only to increase their own influence. even if it meant undermining rivals at the expense of the city's well-being. Corruption seeped into the administrative core, as bribes determined decisions more than laws or justice. This slow erosion of moral and civic discipline weakened the very foundations of the Golden City. Externally, threats gathered like storm clouds. Neighboring states, once intimidated by the city's formidable armies and high walls, began to sense weakness. Raiders tested the kingdom's defenses, striking at its outer provinces and retreating before the central army could respond. Diplomats, who had once treated with the city in respectful awe, now made demands or formed alliances without seeking its blessing. Beyond the horizon, distant empires grew stronger, their ambitions casting long shadows toward the Golden City. Cultural life, once the pride of the realm, also began to falter. The great artisans and architects, who had adorned the city with unmatched beauty, found fewer patrons. Theaters that once staged grand performances saw smaller audiences. The schools and libraries still existed, but the energy of discovery had waned. Scholars repeated the works of the past rather than forging new ideas. The spirit of innovation that had once defined the city seemed to fade, replaced by a longing for the good old days rather than a determination to create a better future. For the common people, life became increasingly difficult. Taxes rose to fund the luxurious lifestyles of the elite and the costly defense of the realm, while wages stagnated. Farmers complained of poor harvests brought on by mismanaged irrigation and changing weather. In some districts, the once bustling streets were lined with shuttered shops. A quiet discontent simmered among the populace, a sense that the promises of the city's golden age had been broken. Yet even in decline, the Golden City retained a strange magnetic beauty. At sunset, the light still bathed the great walls in a warm glow, and the towers still caught the last glimmers of the day like beacons of hope. Pilgrims still came from afar to see its wonders, though they often whispered to each other that the magic felt thinner than they had imagined. Some chroniclers of the time foresaw what was coming. They wrote of cycles in history, of how every great kingdom has its rise, its zenith, and its twilight. In their scrolls, they recorded not only the splendor of the city, but also the warning signs, the complacency, the corruption, the loss of unity, that heralded the end. Few listened, for it was easier to believe that the Golden City was eternal. As the century drew toward its close, the city stood at a crossroads. To some it was still the jewel of the world, a marvel unmatched by any other realm. To others it was a fading star, beautiful, but dimming. The armies still marched in the king's name, the markets still rang with the cries of sellers, and the festivals still lit up the night sky. But beneath the surface, cracks deepened. The twilight of the kingdom was not a single moment, nor a sudden fall. It was a slow, almost imperceptible drift toward vulnerability, like a ship whose sails still catch the wind, but whose hull is quietly leaking beneath the waves. And though the city's story was far from over, the stage was being set for its final, most dramatic chapters, when the forces gathering beyond its walls would test whether it could endure, or whether it would become just another name in the long memory of history. The Golden City, whether interpreted as a real location lost to time, or as a purely symbolic creation of human storytelling, continues to live vibrantly in the modern imagination. From literature to film, from academic debates to casual conversations around the world, the legend refuses to fade. In novels, it appears as the ultimate quest, a destination promising not only unimaginable wealth, but also transformative wisdom. Filmmakers have brought it to life through sweeping visuals of sunlit towers, intricate marketplaces, and lush surrounding landscapes that echo the mythical descriptions passed down for centuries. Scholars continue to pore over ancient maps, historical documents, and archaeological evidence, hoping to trace its origins or identify the cultures that may have inspired the tale. Even in video games, it emerges as a mysterious realm awaiting discovery, often blending myth with puzzle-solving adventures. For many, the Golden City represents a dream of perfection, a society free from poverty, conflict, and injustice, where human potential can flourish without limitation. Its enduring appeal lies in this universal longing, the hope that somewhere hidden beyond the maps and beyond the reach of ordinary life, there exists a place where the best of humanity has taken root and thrived. This vision ensures that the Golden City remains more than a story, it becomes a mirror reflecting both our history and our aspirations.